Hi family, this is African Esquire here with a new video. So I did a video recently about Boyce Watkins versus Yvette Carnell. And kind of a follow-up to that video, more so based off of observations that I've been making as far as different comments about the video, and also comments on Yvette's videos and comments on Dr. Boyce Watkins' video. I wanted to kind of tackle a subject that I'm starting to notice might be an issue in our community. That is the idea that we have to basically label people as either good or bad. And in this case, a lot of people are really quick to label someone a fraud. And I thought that was very interesting because it's almost like, I guess the question is, if you've done a lot of good, legitimate things, let's say you did do something fraudulent, does that mean that you're completely a fraud in all regards? Does it mean that all the good things that you've done no longer matter, it no longer counts? Or can we kind of, walk and chew gum at the same time? Can we look at something that you did wrong and say that that thing that you did shows that you are weak in this area, shows that you need to improve in this area, and out of love, we're calling you to go to a higher standard, but at the same time, we're not going to negate all the good that you've done. Now, this doesn't just apply to Boyce, his situation. And if you want to know the situation, you should look up the whole issue with Charles Wu, basically saying different things about Boyce's program. He's someone that works for Boyce, and basically kind of exposed that and how he tries to market Boyce's Black business school programs. It tries to use it as like a religious type, appeal to Black people. And we were very sensitive to that because we know that historically, religion has been misused to appeal to us to do things and to basically oppress us. So when we hear this Asian man saying, well, we try to make this like a religious call for these people to buy these products, obviously it's going to be an insult. And what he said was completely, just disrespectful, because it kind of assumes that Black people are these emotional beings that just look to leadership and cling to it and don't have necessarily the rationale to differentiate between something that is good or bad for us and whether or not we actually want to use a certain product. So there was definitely a lot of wrong things that were revealed through the revelation of Mr. Wu's video. And I'm not disregarding that at all. But more so, my question is, whenever we have these issues with people who we might follow, or we might follow in some regards, and we might not follow in others, is it good to completely label these people as being frauds? Now, this wasn't just, something I noticed with Boyce Watkins. It's also something I noticed with Umar Johnson. Another fair criticism I think that we can all say about Umar Johnson, as far as his school, there's not been a lot that's come of positive that has come about him trying to build his school that we know of. Maybe there's things that we don't know of. I'm not sure. But as far as what we know, there's no material actions that have been laid out as far as him actually starting his school. I personally kind of think that some of it might be that he misthought or miscalculated certain things. If you remember, originally he wanted to have a completely private school where he was going to try to basically isolate Black children from white supremacist culture and thus feed them on campus, house them on campus, have them go to school on campus, all these things on campus. Realistically, that cost a lot of money. I mean, that's a ridiculous amount of money that you would require to have that type of operation. And I do think that a lot of what happened is that he miscalculated. Some think that he basically pocketed the money and took it. I don't know about that. I have no proof. And so if I don't have proof, I'm not going to assume something. That's just something about me. I mean, I don't care, I might be suspicious of something, but I'm never going to state a fact like I know it's true if I don't have the documents and if I don't have the proof, if I've never read what type of assumptions that people are making be materialized into actual fact. I'm not going to assume those. So that was the issue with Umar. And then another issue, and this is one that I do honestly think, I think he has a very big ego issue. And honestly, it's not new that someone who is a Black leader in our community would have these type of ego issues, because a lot of people who have led us inside of certain ways um, have exhibited pride, especially when they reach this a certain height. We've seen that whenever with his responses to Tariq, you do observe almost a God complex with him, and it's something to be critical of. It's something to correct, and it's something to address. So these are issues that we've seen with him. As far as Tariq, I've heard of different issues with him, nothing I ever looked into. But Brother Polite, he's someone else I've heard of different issues with. I never looked into, so I'm not going to pretend that I know, but I've definitely heard both of these people called frauds. I also know that both of these people have done some positive for the community. So the question to me, that I would like to pose to people, is what do we expect from people who are leaders in the Black community? And what I mean is, and let me first say, I know there's some of you are probably like, we Black people, we don't need leaders. We don't need leaders. You know, why do we always have to have a leader? But we could, yes, you do. You know, I'm sorry to break it to you, but you do need people who are going to lead inside of different regards. It doesn't make them higher inside of, you know, what they do than you, but you do need people to take the forefront inside of certain initiatives. You know, I think Boyce operates as a leader inside of Black self-reliance. I think that Umar has definitely operated as a possible leader inside of Black psychology or in Black education. I think all of us should be leaders at something. I think there's something that I can do that's better than, or even if not better, is more equipped at a certain time, given certain things, to take on certain issues than maybe what you can do. There's things that you can do that you're more equipped and better to take on certain things than what I can do. That makes me a leader in the sphere of influence that I'm in. And that makes you a leader inside of the sphere of influence that you're in. So it's not that we don't need leaders. Every single culture, every single people, they have leaders. Don't think that because it's not the celebrity thing that we've made it into, where we have, you know, the Black leader act like, you know, they're this royal person. That's obviously extra. But as far as having individuals who have identified strengths and saying, okay, you have strength in this particular area, you have strength in this particular talent, you take the lead in this. You know, you do that, and guess what? I have strength in this talent. I'm going to take the lead in this. That is absolutely normal. It's absolutely necessary. Good luck. My thing is, I always go back to history, and that's what I'm going to do throughout this video. And I'm going to say, good luck identifying a culture or people who has succeeded at anything without leadership. I want you to, if you feel that way, I want you to comment. Tell me a people who you say have never had people who led them inside of some type of regard. You're not going to find anyone. I'm telling you that now. It's just not going to happen. So we have to get over that that hostility to having certain people lead in certain regards. But going back to that, now that we established that we do need leaders, what do we expect of those leaders? How much are we going to take from those leaders? Do we expect for them to be perfect? Do we expect for them to be sinless? My argument in this video is basically that if you look throughout history, and since, you know, we're talking about Black people in America right now, we're going to focus on Black history. There's never been, I'm not going to say there's never been, there's been some, but there's rarely a Black leader who has not done something that's either fraudulent or definitely calls their character into question. So if you're applying the same rigid standards that you're applying to people like Umar, people like Boyce, if you're applying the same, if you did this, you did this, you did this, but you didn't do this right, so we're going to completely be done with you. You're finished. You're a fraud. If you're applying that to them, we have to look back at a lot of the people who we basically have made are martyrs. You know, I'm sorry to tell you, and I'm going to go through different people in history in a moment. A lot of these people have fell short. Now, before I go through this, let me just say I'm always for the fact that we do need people to be in leadership, but I'm also very much for the idea that we shouldn't the fact that you're a leader doesn't mean that I submit to you. I submit to what you say. So like I said, Umar Johnson, he to me is a black leader in that he has done, he first of all, I don't care what anyone says about him, this man could talk circles, like intellectually, around a lot of your favorites. He could talk circles around someone like, I know, Angela Rye. He could talk circles around someone like Van Jones. He could talk circles around almost all those people. His oratory skills really do remind me of Malcolm X, and that he can very quickly come up with a rebuttal, and the rebuttal isn't some weak cliche that we're used to hearing, but it's actually a legit point that makes you think. So he's very good in that regard. I also think that he has a powerful message, and if you listen to his teachings, he has positive teachings. That's one thing I'll give Umar Johnson. Does he have other followings? Yes. But as I said before, my big concern is, what you're doing to advance the community. It doesn't mean I'm going to be behind everything that you do. So when I say these people are black leaders, I do not submit to this person's authority. I do not think that this person is perfect, and I do not think that this person should never be checked. I will always think for myself. I do not care who you are. Unless you're my Lord and Savior, I'm not going to just follow you and listen to what you said. I don't care who you are. Okay? So let's just be clear about that. I'm not saying, do we let these people run amok and do whatever? Absolutely not. You should never do that. But what I am saying is that you have to have a critical mind, but you also do have to be able to say, okay, I can write you off for this, but maybe I shouldn't be so critical about things that you have done. So before I get into the historical perspective, I wanted to talk about the psychological perspective. I am more and more, as I get older, I'm starting to realize the importance that psychology plays into us as black people. Because of slavery, our people have been completely brainwashed. Our people have been made to be servants, and a lot of our behaviors today are very much a result of slave teachings. So before I started this video, I wanted to look up some psychology on slavery. The leadership crisis and lack of unity in the black community may also have its attitudinal origins in slavery. Emerging leaders of the slave community were eliminated or co-opted to serve the interests of slave masters. Therefore, out of a fear of hesitancy to exercise strong leadership development, coupled with a collective suspicion targeting anyone attempting to assume leadership roles, politically detrimental divisions within the black community may have been rooted in the stratification introduced by slave masters between field and house slaves. So that is from a book called African American Studies, and it's the Introduction to African American Studies, basically. So given this, when you think about the psychological possible reason why we have a problem basically having any affiliation with someone who does something wrong. Although it's actually unreasonable, because we should all know by now, every one of us are human, every one of us are not perfect. If you are a pastor, if you're a rabbi, if you're a leader of a mosque, you are all susceptible to do things wrong. Similarly, if you are the president, if you are a senator, if you are a congressperson, you are also susceptible to do things that are wrong, regardless of the good that you do. So if you know this of your religious leaders, if you know this of your political leaders, why don't we accept this, that this is a reality for even our leaders inside of the black struggle? So going on now, I want to go through a few examples in history. Not, again, to disregard these people. These are all people who I think are prominent in with the things that they've done for our people. These are all people who've done things that are important. But just to demonstrate that today, especially with social media, if we were to have these people in our modern history, we may honestly call a lot of these people who are our heroes frauds. We may label them, and a lot of us might not mess with them, not based off of the good that they do, but based off of the negative that they do. So we're going to start with one of my favorite people ever, and that is Marcus Garvey. Now, background for Marcus Garvey, in case no one knows, and I expect all of you do, but just a big brief background on him. Marcus Garvey, a lot of people consider him to maybe be one of the founders of Pan-Africanism, as he was really one of the ones that radicalized it. His famous book, The Philosophy and Opinions of Marcus Garvey, had a profound influence on a lot of the people who would become Pan-African leaders inside of Africa, who would struggle for independence inside of their countries and try to bring about a united Africa. These people were all influenced by this man named Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey, when he left Jamaica, he came to the United States. He hooked up with people like Booker T. Washington, and he really was driven by this idea that Black people should be self-reliant. Black people should build our own things. We should own our own things, and we should really return to the motherland at some point. And that was his ultimate goal. Because of this, he developed a lot of good things when he was here. One thing he developed was the Black Star Line, which was a shipping company. Now, there's a lot of good that came out of this. The Black Star Line actually did make some trips throughout the Caribbean. It never made it to Africa, but it did deliver some goods and services to different countries in the Caribbean. More so when you hear from people from that era who had actually witnessed this man, Marcus Garvey, you realize that the symbol that these people who were told that they could never build anything, never be slaves, the symbol of the fact that this man who would wear military garb and had ships that were owned by the Universal Negro Improvement Association, the symbol of this power was just so inspiring to people. So you could tell I'm a big fan of Marcus Garvey, but Marcus Garvey had faults. So we're going to talk about some of his faults. We're going to first start with the Black Star Line. Now, I'm not going to go with the allegations against him, but I will go with what things are commonly universally held to be true. While the Black Star Line did seek to get these ships, and the ultimate goal was that these ships would be able to transport goods between America and the Caribbean and Africa, and ultimately transport us, human beings, to Africa, African human beings to Africa, the ship line essentially failed. One of the reasons why it failed, he raised a lot of money in the Black community. He took the money and he would buy ships. These ships oftentimes were very damaged. Because of that, the mechanical issues with the ships made them ultimately fail. One of the ships actually sunk. Okay, there was a lot of allegations of mismanagement, and some people might say mismanagement of funds. I don't know that to be true, but these were serious allegations against Marcus Garvey. When you look at that, that is actually serious. If you're paying money for a ship line and you see that there are ships that are being bought that are actually in ridiculous condition, that's something that would obviously be of concern to you. So the other thing, and this is probably the more controversial thing that Marcus Garvey did, and I don't necessarily have a big problem with the meeting, but maybe the words that were said, we might say that there's a problem with that. Marcus Garvey had the idea that Black people, African people in America, and the KKK have similar interests. Now, that might be like, what do you mean they have similar interests? Well, he was saying is that ultimately white people really don't want us, and ultimately we don't want them. So if you consider that, we want to go and start our own thing. We want to be separate. We want segregation to some extent. We want to be able to have our own institutions to support and not intermingle into these white institutions. Obviously, not all Black people felt that way, but his followers did feel that way. So because of that, he felt like they had similar interests. Marcus Garvey decided to meet with the Imperial Wizard of the KKK. Yes, the Ku Klux Klan. He met with them, and he spoke at, I think, some type of a conference, something they were having, and the words that he said: "I regard the Klan, the Anglo-Saxon clubs, and white American societies, as far as the Negro is concerned, as better friends of the race than all other groups of hypocritical whites put together. I like honesty and fair play. You may call me a Klansman if you will, but potentially every white man is a Klansman as far as the Negro in competition with whites socially, economically, and politically is concerned, and there is no use lying. Um, so, I think we could kind of read that he was kind of being strategic. Maybe he wasn't being sincere in what he said at that meeting, but trying to play the politics. Regardless, when he had this meeting, a lot of Black people turned on Marcus Garvey because it's kind of like when not in any type of way comparing someone like Steve Harvey to Marcus Garvey, but if you remember when Steve Harvey met with Trump, Black people who were would love with him turned on him in a second. Could you imagine the leader of the largest African American movement ever to have occurred to this day, going to meet with the KKK and having kind words with them? We would turn on Marcus Garvey in a second. So considering that, and considering the failure in a lot of ways of the Black Star Line, Marcus Garvey, who did a lot of good, did also in some ways do things that were not so good for the Black community. I think some people would agree with that. All right, so moving forward in history, we're going to talk about Dr. King. This is kind of brief, number one, because we all know the story of Dr. King, but I will, set some context. So Dr. King, obviously, he was a Christian minister. We all know that about the I Have a Dream speech and everything like that. But he was supposed to be someone of moral upstanding. He spoke. He walked a certain way. He condemned certain behaviors. Now, the FBI, as many of you know, was ran by J. Edgar Hoover, who basically surveillanced Dr. King. And of those surveillances, it was discovered that Dr. King was having affairs. By the way, a lot of it is alleged that those affairs were with white prostitutes. So when you have a man who has condemned these types of behaviors, condemned that type of lifestyle, and you find out, and who was married with children, you find out that he potentially was having extramarital affairs with white prostitutes in hotels, and there's allegations of orgies. We don't know how much of it is true, but it's pretty well accepted that he did have affairs. That's obviously a morally compromising issue. Regardless of that, we know Dr. King did a lot of good things, particularly to me at the end of his life, with what he said more so than what was actually accomplished, because he was assassinated very soon after he changed his philosophical stance. But he really was encouraging Black people to move inside of an independent direction and stop depending on the white power structure for certain things and start supporting ourselves. I actually read a quote from him recently where I was surprised, but he said that segregation, it was after integration was made legal and whatnot. He said, you know what, I think that a lot of Black people, we probably do want to keep segregation in some regards. Segregation in order to meet real equality. So that was from Dr. King, and he said this. But we know Dr. King did a lot of good, but obviously it's morally compromising that he would have an affair. There's also allegations, and I could not find, and I've read this previously, but I could not find it, which is why I'm not going to state it that it's a fact, but there is allegations that perhaps the FBI used his affairs in order to make him do certain things, that make certain decisions as far as how he's going to walk things out. That's a possibility, and even if it is true, would that completely negate all the positive things that Dr. King has done for Black people? Or can we walk and chew gum at the same time and say, yes, he fell short in this regard, but regardless of that, Dr. King did good, and we're going to remember the good with the bad and not just, forget about all the good and only highlight the bad. So next we're going to talk about Elijah Muhammad. Again, this is something that we're all, as far as his controversy, most of us are very well aware of what he did as far as having affairs with young teenage girls. But let's first talk about some of the good Elijah Muhammad did. Elijah, first of all, really took the philosophy of Black nationalism. This is after Marcus Garvey had been gone. He took it and he ran with it, and he implemented it, and a lot of the institutions that were built from him back in the 60s or whatnot are still standing to this day. So one thing with Elijah, he really pressed for self-reliance, like Marcus Garvey. Because of that, the Nation of Islam owns farmland. That's something that you hardly hear about. They own a lot of businesses, and they own a lot of schools. So that was a powerful thing, as you can imagine, particularly for the assimilationist politics, that this man completely went independent and yet was able to survive and able to encourage people to be self-reliant, to depend on self. The other thing is that Elijah Muhammad was a very moral leader in the fact that he was able to change the taste of Black people. And what I mean by that is that at a certain point, Black people were following after things that white people did because we essentially wanted to be, like them. We wanted to integrate into their system. We wanted to carry out what they did. And so you would see Black people drinking alcohol, getting drunk. You would see them smoking cigarettes. You would see them having these consumer goods that were known to be flashy in white communities. But because of him being able to criticize the taste that we had, the taste which succumbed to white supremacy, obviously, he was able to really help Black people to develop new tastes, and instead of supporting behaviors and things that were detrimental to us, try to support things that were actually going to yield positive results for us. Now, Elijah Muhammad did a lot of great things. We also know ways that he fell really short. The obvious way, and it's one of those things, I'm not going to pretend to know exactly what happened with Malcolm X. Actually, I feel like it would be more appropriate to first talk about the affairs. So the first thing is that it was found out by Malcolm X and certain other people in the Nation of Islam that Elijah Muhammad was having affairs with teenage girls. Now, I've heard Louis Farrakhan come out, recently and say it's true that he was having these affairs, but he had other wives, and if you know Islam, it's acceptable to have more than one wife. Polygamy there's no condemnation of polygamy inside of the Quran. Absolutely. I don't buy that because teenage girls are teenage girls. It's not like, in addition to him supposedly having these, if you want to call them wives, these women were put to shame for having affairs with Elijah. For having children, they were put to shame for that. So I don't buy that he considered them wives, because if they were your wife, why would you allow them to be basically ostracized from the nation for bearing your child? So I don't buy that, number one. Number two, I know maybe back in the day it was okay to have, sexual relations with a teenager. It's not anymore. It's illegal. Okay. So regardless, you should not have been having sex, especially as old as you are, with some teenage girls, period. So I don't buy that. And so to me, that's a very moral, compromising issue. The other thing, obviously, is that Elijah Muhammad is believed to have played a part in the assassination of Malcolm X. We cannot completely validate this because, number one, we do know that the U.S. government was a part of it. We know that the U.S. government was surveillancing Malcolm X. We know the U.S. government was infiltrating Malcolm's people around him. For example, his security guard was an agent who was supposed to be on the stage when Malcolm was assassinated, but so happened that the day that he was assassinated, he happened to not be on the stage. He happened to be in a crowd. So we know the U.S. government was in cahoots with this. I don't know what happened. I'm not going to act like I do, but I personally don't believe that the nation had nothing to do with it. And the reason is because regardless of if the United States government helped orchestrate it, we know that 4 of the shooters of Malcolm were members of the nation. So we'll leave it at that. A lot of people believe that, Elijah did have something to do with it. Malcolm seems, if he lived to tell the story, I'm sure he would say that it had to be him, because he was very adamant that the nation turned against him. He was adamant that the nation was the one that firebombed his house. So obviously, there's a lot of reason to believe that the nation ultimately did have a part in the assassination of Malcolm X. Now, knowing that, do we forget about all the good Elijah Muhammad has done? A lot of Black men have read his book, is it Muhammad Speaks? A lot of black people have changed the way that we eat because of Elijah Muhammad, and a lot of black businesses are started. There's black people owning farmland. These are things that are positive. So do we completely disregard all the good this man has done and only make him the bad thing? It's another question to ask. All right, I'm gonna do one more. And honestly, this is all I could think of in this moment. I promise you, if you look into your favorite, you could probably find some dirt on them, because no human being is perfect. But we're going to end out with a man who I also love, but he had a lot of issues, and that was Huey P. Newton. Huey P. Newton, along with Bobby Seale, founded the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense. This was a party that was created in response to the Civil Rights Movement, which had largely failed to be able to protect black people from police brutality, and also it failed to help black people to be self-reliant, in a lot of ways. So the Black Panther Party really addressed a lot of these issues where the Civil Rights Movement fell. Huey was a powerful leader in the movement. There was a campaign made for him when he was accused of murdering an officer, Free Huey. So a lot of people rallied behind him, and he was just generally a person who really cared about black people, who did a lot of good for black people. When you get a chance, look into all the things that the Black Panther Party has done for black people. The well-known one, of course, is the breakfast program, the Panthers breakfast program, where they just fed black children every morning for breakfast because they knew that there was a need, because black children were going to school hungry. The Panthers did a lot of good in the community. But Huey, as the crack epidemic did roll into the United States, he became a victim of the crack epidemic. And Huey P. Newton, while he was in leadership, while he was still the leader of the Black Panther Party, became addicted to cocaine. Now, one of the things that he did because of his addiction is he would take money from the Black Panther Party that was meant for them, and he would use it for his addiction. Ultimately, Huey P. Newton died because of a drug transaction that essentially went bad. So, obviously, it's fraudulent, to use the word fraud, that he would take money that was meant to go to the Black Panthers community programs and use it to feed his crack addiction. Do we completely disregard that this man created the Black Panther Party? Do we completely disregard the fact that Huey P. Newton really helped to write a lot of the black independent ideology of the Black Panther Party? Look at the 10-point program. Realize that had such an influence on black people at that time. Do we completely disregard him as a black leader because of his addiction and his fraudulent activity? It's something else to ask. So, to conclude, like I said in the beginning, I'm not 100% a follower of anyone. I do not blindly follow any person. I just don't. But I can say that I can acknowledge when people do good. When I see that your heart is with black people, it's hard for me to write you off. I don't care who you are. If we leave the conscious space for a little bit, Al Sharpton, I have a lot of problems with a lot of things that he does. I really do. Probably him and, the mainstream blacks, for some reason, I have more problems with them. But I can also see a lot of good that they've done. So I can walk and chew gum at the same time. Most importantly, I'm not going to demonize this person. I can live without this person being evil in my mind. I can live understanding that human beings are complex. We have faults, and we're going to fall short of our ideals at some point or another. So it's just something to make you think. I really think that we're really not going to go anywhere as a people if we keep relying on this demonization of people who take leadership roles in our community. You should correct them by all means. We should say you need to do better, and hopefully they are welcoming of criticism. If they're not welcoming of criticism, that's going to be a whole other issue, because it's like, well, okay, you're just going to keep this fault then, and that's just what it is. You're going to succumb to your pride. But they're still continuing to do the good parts of things that they've done. I don't think we have to demonize those things. I don't think we have to demonize everything that Boyce Watkins does going forward. Yes, it was a messed up video that was released of Charles Wu, but I'm not going to demonize him. A lot of people tried to demonize Yvette Carnell for coming out against Farrakhan. I don't agree with her criticisms, but guess what? I'm not going to demonize her because she's doing something. She's trying to get information out to Black people. She's trying to help the community as a whole. I can, disagree with you on one thing, and at the same time, I could say, you know what, you're someone that's trying to do something positive. Umar Johnson. I could say, you know what, he has potential issues, mental issues, to be completely frank. He has pride issues. He is probably not managing his school the best way, but he is someone who inspires people to educate their children correctly. He's someone who is very intellectual in the way that he has political discourse. He has a lot of positive philosophical stances. I can acknowledge those and I can support those, even though I say I can't support the other stuff. So these are my thoughts. This is just my thoughts. I understand that everyone is going to be inclined to agree. But I would say just think about it, let it resonate with you. And I would like to see your comments.